Welcome back to another episode of Terraria Infernum. Before we start, I have to mention that this video's style is going to be much more centered on breaking down the boss's attacks rather than the last videos. Additionally, all of this was recorded a couple months ago, so my thoughts and minor actions are going to be overlooked because I have 15 hours of video to get through and I can't look at every second. Without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Last time we crawled our way out of pre-hard mode and now we're in Calamity Infernum hard mode. The first thing I do is mine all of the palladium and cobalt I can get my hands on to prepare for the I find myself a gelatin crystal and summon her. Let's see what changes Infernum makes to her. Queen Slime has two phases. Phase 1 consists of repeating 4 attacks, with the final attack having 2 variations. First, she arcs around the player, spawning crystals along her path. She then flies above the player and slams down, also sending the crystals down with her. This attack isn't too hard to dodge. All you have to do is dash to an open spot as she slams down or run to a spot where the crystals aren't at. This transitions her into the next attack, where she spawns a ton of crystals alongside laser beams that lock onto the player before firing. Panic moving is a bad idea as you would complicate the attack a lot more than if you were calm and collected. After the lasers lock on, you dash to a spot that isn't covered by a laser. Rinse and repeat until after the third beam, I think. Her next attack is a bit complicated, but after you get the rhythm of it you should be fine. Queen Slime will eject slime from above her, and the crown will orbit you while shooting volleys of 5 projectiles. If you're familiar with bullet hells, then this attack is not that hard, but if not, then my advice would be to focus on an opening above you and move left and right. You'll be able to jump over the bullets and fit between the gaps. Her final attack in this phase has 2 variations. Both of them start with Queen Slime spawning other slimes beside her, then slamming down. The crystal variation sends projectiles upwards, while the bounce variation, well, bounces. For both of them, it's best to get as high as possible to avoid as many projectiles. After you deal enough damage, she will enter phase 2, which consists of 2 new attacks. First, she enters a pillar of light and summons projectiles that attract to her. You can still damage her in this attack, and the projectiles are well choreographed, so go ham. Her next attack is much harder to handle, but given enough practice you should be able to beat her quickly. Queen Slime flies to above you and explodes into a star-shaped pattern and shoots a volley of 5 projectiles at you. She does this 3 times before going into her next attack. My advice is to stay diagonally to her and dodge the volley as best you can. The rest of her attacks are the same as phase 1 but with a little twist. Her arc spawns more crystals, her laser beam spawns 6 lasers rather than 4, her crown shooting attack shoots more often, and her slime slam down attack spawns slime more closely together. Despite all this, she's very manageable. All you have to do is stay calm and collected and pay close attention to the paths of her bullets and slime.
Let's go!
Queen Slime is purely an optional boss, but I'm going for every boss in Infernum, so yeah. Next up is Cryogen. This boss I hate. In normal Calamity, I struggled with this boss so much that I had to skip it and beat it later with better items. Hopefully, the same isn't true in Infernum. Cryogen has a total of 6 phases. Each phase will usually enhance an attack, so I will be naming the attacks and describing their changes. He starts off with 3 attacks. First, his wheel of projectiles spawns icicles around him that after spinning shoots straight out. To avoid, you have to micro move to barely fit between the gaps. His next attack I call homing projectiles, which home onto the player. For this attack, wait until most of them are shot, then dodge to the left or right. His final attack on phase 1 is Chase. He will follow the player and spawn crystals, then teleport and continue following for a little. The crystals he spawned explode into projectiles after a couple seconds, so to avoid them just run away to another spot in your arena. In his second phase, his wheel and his homing attack will have more projectiles, and he will unlock a new move which I call Ice Pillars. Ice Pillars shoot out less projectiles than his wheel attack, but he spawns Ice Pillars on the left and right of the player. These pillars will explode and shoot projectiles at the player. To beat this attack, have your arena have multiple levels and drop down when the pillars shoot. For his third phase, wheel, homing, and chase receive no changes. His Ice Pillar attack, Ring, will have a second layer. Cryogen also unlocks a new attack which I call Surround. Cryogen flies around the player while spawning sets of 2 projectiles that home onto the player. My advice is to move in the clockwork pattern as shown. His fourth phase will start with a new attack, which I call Charge. As the name implies, Cryogen charges at the player repeatedly and spawns the same projectiles as Surround. To avoid it, do a similar maneuver that you do to Surround. His wheel attack gets a second layer and he no longer uses his homing projectiles attack, to my knowledge that is. Chase, Surround, and Ice Pillars receive no changes. Cryogen's 5th phase also starts with Charge, which acts the same as prior. The only move that gets changed is Surround, which simply spawns projectiles faster. However, he unlocks yet another attack, which I call Solstice. Cryogen hovers above the player and spawns a bunch of projectiles that sway while moving left and right. The best way to dodge is just to lock in and dodge the projectiles. Cryogen's 6th and final phase starts off with Surround instead of Charge. Additionally, he only does Surround, Charge, Wheel of Projectiles, and Solstice. His Charge is the only thing changed in this phase, spawning 3 projectiles instead of 2, or spawning Solstice projectiles. Unfortunately, my skill is too low to beat Cryogen with the items available to me, but unlike Skeletron, I have other options. I decide it's finally time to build a full arena for our future battles. I set my sights on the next level of hard mode Ore, but to unlock that, I need to beat one of the 3 mech bosses. At first, I follow the game's recommendation and try on the twins, but for reasons we'll get to later, I give up on them. Instead, I look at Skeletron Prime. Unlike his predecessor, Skelly Prime's moves aren't that hard to handle, so that's the next boss we will be targeting. Skeletron Prime has 3 phases. Phase 1, he attacks with his hands. He first shoots at a line that tries to predict where the player is going, then his other melee hands dash at the player. He does this 3 times before going into his next attack. To dodge this, just run left and right and time your dashes to make the hands miss. His next attack has 2 variations. The first one, Saw, is where he'll send his saw directly below him, shooting out projectiles. Again, just running is enough to avoid, though you may have to jump over the projectiles. His next variation is Joust, where the melee hands dash at the player. Running is enough to dodge them. Skeletron's 2nd phase starts when his hands die. He has 3 attacks. His dash attack dashes at the player and spawns projectiles behind him that follow his trajectory in an arc. Dodging these are fairly difficult, so you can try to go around them if you are fast enough. His new shoot attack shoots a bunch of homing missiles and metal skulls at the player. They're not too hard to dodge. His final attack is a bullet barrage, where Skeletron hovers above the player and shoots out a ring of spikes. For this attack, all you have to do is slightly move to an opening, or sometimes not even move at all. For his final phase, his 3 normal attacks don't change, however he gains 2 new ones. One called Stasis is where Skeletron spawns balls of electricity that explode into an electrical field, dealing damage. This attack is dangerous because of how long they linger for, so just move to a place where they're not at and you should be fine. His other attack is called Overcharge. Skeletron shoots out lasers in 6 directions for a while and shoots homing rockets and other projectiles at the player. It's really hard to dodge the projectiles, but not impossible. As long as you have his other attacks down, you should be able to defeat him no problem. The game has now spawned Mithril and Orochi Malum for us to obtain, which I spend the next hour or so doing so. I dip my toes in to feel the waters of the Aquatic Scourge and the Destroyer, and after carefully contemplating my choices, I decide to take on the twins have 4 phases total. In phase 1, they both have 4 attacks that they will typically do at the same time. Retinator stays to the left of the player and Spasmatism to the right. For the first attack, Retinator shoots a projectile directly at the player, while Spasmatism shoots a volley of 4. Their second attack is they dash at the player on intervals with each other, as shown. Their third attack is they rotate around the player, shooting a projectile each, then dash at the player. Their fourth attack is where they vary. Retinator shoots 5 projectiles at the player, while Spasmatism flamethrowers in a straight line towards the player. To avoid most of their attacks, you just have to find the gaps, but try to stay in the middle. For the fourth attack, run as far as you can from Spaz. If he gets too close, bait his flamethrower, then dodge to his sides. Once you hit one of the eyes low enough, it will enter its second phase animation and you can't damage it anymore. You must damage the other eye to get into the second phase. Phase 2 is mostly the same as Phase 1, just faster. Phase 3 has the same activation as Phase 2, but instead of stopping being immortal when one eye is damaged enough, it becomes immortal until the other one dies. Once again, every prior attack is faster, but they have a new attack, which I call Death Ray. For Death Ray, a lot of projectiles spawn. My advice is stay as far away from them as possible to give them the biggest gaps in the moves, and definitely do not be under them when they do this move. The fourth phase has 2 variations depending on who is alive. For Retinator, it will go to a corner of the screen and shoot a gathering of projectiles, then switch to another corner. Each time it switches, it will spawn projectiles above, below, to the left and right of the player. After 5 or 6 switches, it will charge a laser beam twice, which spawns projectiles along its beam. Then it will dash at the player 5 times, shooting projectiles out from him. It then repeats the cycle. To beat him, move diagonally to dodge most of his attacks. For the laser beam, move up until the beam shoots and then avoid the projectile spawned. This is the easier fight, which I would recommend going for. But if you want to, or if you accidentally end up killing Retinator first, Spasmatism will dash at the player then spawn 6 Fire Blasts from itself 3 times. During this, fire will target the player's horizontal position. After, it will shoot 2 waves of 4 curving flames at the player, then it will start spinning and spewing flames and projectiles while chasing the player. Once it's done, it will repeat the cycle. To beat him, you need good wings or very vertical arena. His charging attack is very obnoxious to run from, and more so to dodge, which is why I recommend Retinator. After I beat them, I do the normal things of, go mine, collect all the adamantite and titanium. Then, it's time to finish the mech trio with... The Destroyer has 4 phases. During all of them, it spawns probes when hurt. These probes launch themselves at the player and explode. Phase 1 consists of a single attack, which I call Charge. The Destroyer flies towards the player and, you wouldn't guess it, charges at them when close enough. This attack can be very annoying, but a strat I learned is to bait it into this rectangle pattern. It becomes a lot more easier after. Phase 2 adds 3 new attacks while still having Charge. First, Encircle. The Destroyer flies around the player spawning probes. You can either avoid them if you're confident in your abilities or just take them out. Its next new attack is Bomb. The Destroyer flies up and lobbies bombs down to the ground. This is just a dodging game as well. Honestly, it hits me most of the time whenever I try to play it. Finally, there's its laser attack. Vertical lasers surround the player and all you have to do is stay between them. Its third phase doesn't change its charge attack, but changes the bomb and laser. Bomb just has more bombs, I think, and lasers are no longer locked on the vertical axes. For the third phase, the Destroyer gets 2 new attacks. The first one I call Empress of Light move or EOL move. That's because it spawns projectiles like the Empress of Light. Fly in non-straight paths to avoid it, but be wary because it can also charge you while doing this. Its next move I call Obliterate. Destroyer spawns a sphere that soft homes onto the player and explodes after a couple of seconds, shooting out a lot of projectiles. It also mimics the EOL move and spawns those projectiles as well. As long as you keep moving, dodging shouldn't be too hard. Its final phase is like its third phase, but all of the attacks except the bomb spawns the EOL projectiles. As long as you find a comfortable rhythm, this boss isn't too hard. This guy who totally won't be relevant later stalks my victory, but I pay him no mind. After getting fully set up, I decide it's time to clear out the bosses we skipped. I start with Cryogen, who we already discussed. Then I tackle the Aquatic Scourge has 3 phases. This fight takes place underwater, and if you dare go up, you will experience this. During the fight, blue bubbles will spawn to breathe and recover radiation. In the first phase, Scourge has 4 attacks. In its first attack, Spit, the Scourge slowly chases the player and spits 4 projectiles at them. It's an easy pattern to dodge. The second attack I call Slam. The Scourge charges at the player, leaving behind damaging steam. If he hits a wall, it will spawn a wave of projectiles. The third attack is Charge. Scourge charges at the player and spits steam while rocks fall from the sky. The final attack is Bubble Blast, in which the Scourge swims around in a circle and spits bubbles at the player. For its second phase, its Bubble Blast gets replaced with a Scale attack where Scourge shoots out way too many projectiles that home onto the player. To avoid this, I recommend staying near the Scourge and making a loop around its scales to throw them off. Every other attack in this phase stays the same. For the third and final phase, steam erupts from the water and forces the player out of it. The player gets infinite fight, which you already had during the whole fight, but I kinda only realized that after writing the script. So anyway, Scourge uses Spit and Charge alongside a new attack called Typhoon. Typhoon spawns a Typhoon that shoots out the same projectiles as Spit. Spit rains down projectiles instead of shooting at the player while spawning bubbles. And for Charge, no rocks will fall during Charge. The third phase is relatively easy as the player gets infinite flight to dodge a lot of the attacks. Just keep an eye on where the Scourge so it doesn't surprise you with its charge. With the Scourge down, the final cleanup boss is found in the fiery depths of hell, or more accurately, the... This lovely lady has 3 phases. In its first phase, it has 4 attacks. The first one I call Bullet Hell. This attack spawns a lot of projectiles that fly away from her. There was no little trick for this one, you just gotta get good. The next attack is called Wavy because its projectiles fly in a wavy form. Again, you just gotta dodge it. The next one is called Entrapment. She locks you in a ring and spawns a bunch of balls that explode into 2 projectiles. Stay as far away from them as you can, and dodging the incoming projectiles will be easy. Her final attack is Teleport, where she teleports left and right, spawning skulls before teleporting again. All you have to do to avoid them is fly at different heights. Her second phase is practically the same as the first one, just more projectiles. The third phase adds one move, Laser Beam. She charges a beam, and when it shoots, it spawns projectiles out of it. It tries to target where you will be, not where you are, so dodge last second. Every other move in the third phase is the same as second phase. When recording, I distinctly remember wanting to end the episode here, as it's already been 13 hours and editing me would hate it if I continued. But that felt wrong. Brimstone Elemental as the final boss of the episode? No. So for the final part of the episode, I will fight the Calamity Clone, or I think it's called Supreme Witch Calamity Clone in Infernum, but I'm just going to refer to it as the Calamity Clone because it's what's in the book. Anyway, she has a very complicated movement and attack pattern, and she does things later on that I honestly don't know what it does. She has a total of 5 phases. Her first phase consists of 6 attacks that repeat on a cycle. In order of appearance, Wand Flurry. She shoots out waves of projectiles and throws her wand to explode into more projectiles. Flying is honestly the only way to avoid them. Minions. She summons minions that orbit her and shoot directly at the player. Keep track of where the minions are and fly away from them and her. Laser Swipe. She charges a laser that swipes around in a 90-degree arc. The goal here is to get on the other side of the swipe before she starts, so save your dash for when the line stops moving. Barrage. She teleports around the player and spawns a wave of projectiles. Flying away from her again is the best way to dodge. Surround. She creates a field around her that damages the player outside. She begins drawing projectiles in a spiral, and after, launches them at the player. The best way to deal with this attack is staying close to her while dodging the projectiles, then run as far away from her to avoid the blast. For her second phase, she summons 2 enemies for us to fight, Catastrophe and Cataclysm, and a ring of minions prevents you from leaving. They both have 3 attacks which they will do at the same time. For the first attack, they both dash at you from the left to right, slightly moving above and below the attacks is not hard. The second attack has them both hover over you. Catastrophe shoots 3 wide projectiles while Cataclysm shoots 5 small projectiles. Moving slightly to avoid them is the answer to these. The final attack is a cross where Catastrophe dashes from below to above you and spawns projectiles at the top, and Cataclysm simply dashes from the left or right. After you deal with them, you're on phase 3. Now this is the part where I'm not sure what she does. She puts a hex on you, and throughout the fight it either spawns a minion that orbits you and shoots at you, or I think makes projectiles slightly home onto you. Again, I'm only assuming these, so take my word with a grain of salt. She has the same attack pattern as phase 1 with a new move at the end, which I call Charge. She charges at you and shoots projectiles all around her. At this point, you gotta be good at bullet hells to progress into this mod. Her fourth phase only has 3 attacks. First, Wand Flurry is no longer a wave of bullets, but instead shoots an explosive that bursts into a ring of bullets. Second, her charge no longer explodes into projectiles, but instead leaves smoke where she flew and spawns the projectiles while she's moving. The projectiles home onto the player and the smoke damages the player. Her third attack is what I call Flaming Petals. She spawns projectiles that, believe it or not, fly in a petal formation. After you deal enough damage, she goes into her 5th and final phase. This time, nah, just kidding. With her dead, I decide to relax for a bit and build another house for my NPCs. Thank you so much for watching. This style is very different from the previous, and it's thanks to feedback from you guys. Let me know in the comments any changes I can make again to enhance your viewing experience. If you enjoyed, do the YouTube things to show it, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye!